The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
So, first of all, thank you to everyone for their practice so far today. Lovely morning setting. Very, very still, in the room and out. I think Temple Bar has calmed down since last week. Wasn't nearly as mental as it has been, so it made for a lovely place to sit. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, I gave you a sneak preview earlier on, but I had a few ideas bouncing around for what it is I want to talk about today, and for a few weeks, kind of two completely separate teishos about two different topics, and then the first thing I wanted to do was I had this plan, which is to go through the meal chant and go through it, section by section, and kind of explain what it means. Because it occurred to me that sometimes we chant these things with sort of exotic references. And I think, we're all very versed in the basics of Zen and Shobogenzo, and, Myo-Zan has taught us all the fundamental Zen ideas. But occasionally you're doing a full moon ceremony or the meal chants, and there's very exotic, esoteric phrases in there. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about some of them. So in my hubris, I said, that's what we'll do. We'll go through the meal chants. And that was my plan. And then I was starting to diligently make my way through it. And, doing my research and explaining a bit about Buddha was born in Kapilavatthu. Then I got to the line, homage to the boundless Dharmakaya Vairocana Buddha. And I was like, that is a teisho in itself. The word Dharmakaya is a teisho in itself. So that was kind of interesting to me. Like that line itself, homage to the boundless Dharmakaya Vairocana Buddha. What does that mean? And at the same time, I was thinking about another teisho on a fascicula Shobogenzo, Wibutsu, Yobutsu, Buddhas alone with Buddhas, which I really, really love, and I've been digging into it. And I was thinking about doing that, and it's towards the end of Shobogenzo, so Myo-Zan has only done it recently, and then I realized at one stage, Dogen mentions Vairocana Buddha, and I was like, that's my cue. It is time to talk about the elusive Vairocana Buddha. What does Vairocana Buddha mean? So I want to talk a little bit about who is Vairocana Buddha, if you don't know, maybe you do. I knew just basics about Vairocana Buddha before looking into this. And I might talk a little bit, depending on time, as to how does this relate to our practice? Why would Dogen mention Vairocana Buddha? Why is it in our meal chants? Because I'll say a few things from the start. Vairocana Buddha as a character is a really, really, really important and central Buddha in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism. Very important in some schools of Buddhism, such as Shingon Buddhism. Not really that central in Zen. And you would rarely see a statue of Vairocana Buddha in Zen temples. You would definitely see it in like a Shingon temple, which I'll talk a bit about. But Dogen included Vairocana Buddha in a lot of the chants and encouraged his monks to invoke the name of Vairocana Buddha. And throughout Shobogenzo, as I noticed, great thing about PDFs is you can do a search. Vairocana Buddha, and ding, 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 ding. It appeared quite a bit. So, whilst it's kind of on the periphery of Zen practice, it's also not at all. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about Vairocana Buddha and what has this got to do with what we do here. A few things off the start. So the line is homage to the boundless Dharmakaya of Vairocana Buddha. Now we need to talk about Dharmakaya in a second. And if we talk about Dharmakaya, we have to talk about Sambhogakaya. And if we talk about Sambhogakaya, we have to talk about Nirmanakaya. And this teisho becomes 9 hours long. So I'm going to kind of paint in broad strokes because I said you could talk about the 3 bodies of Buddha endlessly. You could talk about Dharmakaya itself endlessly. So this is going to be broad strokes, just to give you a flavour of what that line means and why it might be included. And does it have anything to do with what we've been doing today? So a few things. Vairocana Buddha is, I suppose, again, I'm going to paint sort of broad strokes, what could be considered one of the cosmic Buddhas. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's sometimes said to be 5 Buddhas of the 5 directions. It's north, south, east, west, and central. Now, for instance, a very famous Buddha, you've probably heard of Amida Buddha, or Amitabha Buddha, is the Buddha of the West. And Amitabha Buddha is considered the Buddha of Pure Land Buddhism. So Amitabha in the West has this realm, the Pure Lands. And then there's north, south, and east, and I can't remember their names. But Amitabha Buddha is quite well known. The Buddha of the center is Vairocana Buddha. And what's interesting when you look into this is that Vairocana Buddha is the Buddha of all Buddhas, the Buddha that underlines and maintains all of existence in this cosmology. Vairocana Buddha, the word Vairocana comes from Sanskrit and essentially means sun or solar or shining. And Vairocana Buddha also is sometimes known as Mahavairocana Buddha, which means great sun or shining Buddha. So essentially is the great sun Buddha, the Buddha of the sun. And as I said, Amitabha Buddha is sometimes known as the Buddha of eternal light, the Buddha of the West. So Buddhas are often sometimes associated with various things. There's a medicine Buddha. There's various bodhisattvas. Manjushri bodhisattva, kind of wisdom. Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion. So Vairocana Buddha is associated with this idea of the sun. And the way it's described is that Vairocana is this kind of glowing Buddha who's omniscient, whose light touches all things. And these descriptions are made like, unlike the sun that only shines at night, the sun of Vairocana Buddha shines all the time. Unlike the sun's rays that cast shadows, Vairocana's light touches all things in the universe. So it's usually depicted as bright white, and in the iconography of Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, Buddhas are usually depicted in different ways. For instance, if we look at Manjushri bodhisattva, usual symbology with Manjushri is things like sitting on a lion or carrying a sword. Avalokiteshvara, sometimes 4 arms, sometimes 108 arms, sometimes 1,008 arms, holding various things. Medicine Buddha is holding a medicine plant. So there's various iconography associated with various different Buddhas. And the same is for Vairocana Buddha. And often as well with various different Buddhas, they have their hands in various mudras. A few years ago, you'd be reading a book and it'd just be a statue of a Buddha and it just looks like all Buddhas to me. And someone would say, this is definitely Vairocana Buddha. And you're like, how do you know that? And then when you delve into it, you realize it's the way their hands are. What's actually interesting is our Shakyamuni Buddha up here is in Zazen posture. But often a statue of Shakyamuni Buddha, they're touching the ground. Amitabha Buddha, if you've ever seen, sometimes has their hands like that. So that's a way of knowing it's Amitabha Buddha. So if you see a statue and it's like that, it could look exactly like our old friend Shakyamuni. It could, like from top up, it could be the exact same, but if their hands are like that, it generally means that. Vairocana Buddha, the mudra associated is this. Okay, so it's a fist and a finger, there's various other things which are kind of symbolism. But the other thing I'll say about a lot of this stuff is it differs wildly. One school of Buddhism says one thing, another school of Buddhism says something completely different. It's kind of interesting sometimes explaining to my friends and family. I think they think there's just one Buddhism, and I mean, in researching this, you read two completely different descriptions of Vairocana Buddha. But there's a general theme that runs through this. So that's just a little bit about the iconography of Vairocana Buddha. A lot of the mentions of Vairocana Buddha comes from mainly one sutra, the I'm going to try and pronounce it right, Saka Sutra, also known as the Flower Garland Sutra, which is this massive, sprawling Mahayana Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, which is really central to an entire school of Buddhism in China, for instance. And there is also a Mahavairocana Sutra itself, and as I said, they pop up in various different places. So that's the character of Vairocana Buddha. Now, I'll talk about this in a minute, but the other thing about Vairocana Buddha is Amitabha Buddha is the Buddha of the Pure Land. So Amitabha Buddha has created this realm for beings to be born into. That's the mythology of that. Shakyamuni Buddha, we know, was born and died on this earth. To kind of jump ahead and give you the main thing about Vairocana Buddha is not just a cosmic Buddha. Vairocana Buddha is all of reality. Everything is the body of Vairocana Buddha. The entire universe, all cosmos, all realms, up and down, which we'll talk about now in a moment. The universes within universes within universes. Vairocana's body is the body of all reality. So for a Buddha that we don't talk about that often, they are smack bang at the center of everything. Hence, in those mandalas of the Buddhas of the 5 directions, Vairocana Buddha is always in the center. And it is said that the universe comes out of, or is equivalent to Vairocana Buddha. Now, the other thing about that line, homage to the boundless Dharmakaya Vairocana Buddha, is, what does Dharmakaya mean? Well, the only really way to talk about Dharmakaya is to talk about the next 2 lines. The next one is an homage to the complete Sambhogakaya Lochana Buddha, and then the manifest Nirmanakaya Shakyamuni Buddha. So basically, again, in broad strokes, these are known as the 3 bodies of a Buddha, and they really are about the 3 aspects of what a Buddha is. And I mean, you can start with the Dharmakaya and go one way. You can start with the Nirmanakaya and go the other way. I guess the easiest one to understand is the Nirmanakaya Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, for instance. The Nirmanakaya is the physical body of a Buddha, the flesh and blood human being body of a Buddha that we would understand as a body. Now, with all these things come a massive asterisk, because when you dig into it, the Buddha's Nirmanakaya Buddha wasn't actually a real body, you know. So it says, it's easy to understand. Nirmanakaya is the Buddha's physical body. Then you read a little bit later on. Of course, it's not a real body. You know, everything is contextual here. But I mean, that's actually a point in a way. It is about our level of understanding. But I think we understand here that 2,500 years ago, a human being was born. Now, we always like to stress, by the way, that Shakyamuni Buddha was a real human being. And then again, you find out he was born, he stepped out of his mother's side and spoke, you know. He had a lump on the top of his head, you know, magical properties. But he was a real human being, you know. So all of this stuff is you know, you have to kind of find your own way through it and your own meaning for it, I think. But the main understanding of the Nirmanakaya Buddha is it's the physical body of a Buddha. The Buddha that is born in your world, speaks, lives, eats, shits, dies, is the Nirmanakaya Buddha. That is an aspect of a Buddha, their body. Now, the Sambhogakaya Buddha is essentially the magical body of a Buddha, to put it like that. Something we don't really like to talk about in Zen. It's kind of, shh, don't talk about this. But a Buddha can appear in any time and space. And you know this because when you read sutras, Manjushri just shows up, you know. Someone is at Vulture Peak and Maitreya will show up and begin speaking. 84,000 Buddhas are at a conference and, you know, Amitabha Buddha appears. So a lot of the sutras feature Buddhas appearing to people and speaking. And it's the Sambhogakaya Buddha, which is often that iconography of a Buddha sitting on a lotus, floating in clouds, the ability to appear in any time and space. Now again, this is one interpretation because there are other interpretations, but the general idea of a Sambhogakaya Buddha is that a Buddha can at will appear in any time and space magically. You know, it's the best way to describe it. Quick, you know, interesting fact here. Lochana Buddha, if you look up Lochana Buddha, you'll find very little information. Because Lochana Buddha, scholars generally believe, is Vairocana Buddha, and it was basically a typo that got into the tradition. So the Sanskrit got translated into Chinese, and along the way it got written down as Lochana Buddha, and they've just kept it. But scholars believe Lochana Buddha is Vairocana Buddha. Interesting side point. Someone else will come along and say, no, Lochana Buddha is this. But generally it's believed Lochana Buddha is Vairocana Buddha. But Sambhogakaya Buddha is, think about any story you've read of a Maitreya character appearing magically. That is generally what Sambhogakaya Buddha means. For anyone who knows about Star Wars, the analogy I like to give is, you know, Obi-Wan and Yoda, they're real guys and then they get killed. And in a later movie they show up again, glowing. That's like the Sambhogakaya Buddha.
More powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Exactly. So when they die, they come back more powerful. So Yoda appears as a glowing spectre in a later thing. That's Sambhogakaya Yoda. But that's kind of the way it is. It's this kind of magical aspect. Again, a little caveat here. Talk a little bit from a Zen point of view. As we all know, Zen tends to be quite earthy and real. And if you read Shobo Genzo, you find very little reference to such miraculous things. Often a lot of Chan and Zen teachers talk about Sambhogakaya more allegorically. We know that Dogen talks very little about rebirth, for instance. Now it's a whole other topic about whether he believed it or not, and I'm not going there. But you do find very little magical talk in something like Shobo Genzo. And Sambhogakaya is generally considered then to be like the mind of a Buddha. You know, it's considered more of an allegorical thing. You make up your own mind on that, you know, whether or not you do believe Amitabha. And that's something I want to talk about later on, about how does this relate to us. Then the final part is Dharmakaya Buddha. And again, there's multiple definitions of Dharmakaya Buddha. There are subtle different ways of talking about it. The general description of Dharmakaya Buddha is all of reality, and it's known as the Buddha's true body. So Nirmanakaya is like the manifest physical body. Sambhogakaya is sometimes known as the reward body or the bliss body. The Dharmakaya means the true body, and it is all of reality, everything, the whole kit and caboodle. Suchness, tathata, shunyata, the whole thing. And I guess as complex as some of this stuff is, it kind of makes sense, because we know that in the ultimate sense there are no boundaries. In the ultimate sense, self and other fall away. So this is just explaining that yes, Buddha appears to us as a person with a name and a history, But from the Buddha's perspective, and I don't think this is shocking to anyone in here, you know, this idea of the true self, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi talks about the big self and the little self. And as I'll talk about in a bit, a lovely line from Weibutsu Yobutsu is, your true body is nothing less than the entire universe. So that's really what Dharmakaya is expressing, that a Buddha's true body isn't limited, and the same goes for all of us. I think it's an expression of that non-duality. So that's what those 3 lines really mean. The Dharmakaya is all of reality. Equated with Buddha nature, equated with emptiness, equated with the cosmos, in some words, consciousness, awareness, everything. Everything is contained within that. Sambhogakaya, as I said, is this magical sense of a Buddha, for want of a better term, and Nirmanakaya is the physical body of a Buddha. Now, both Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya are considered form Buddhas because they appear in a form. The Dharmakaya is beyond form, beyond words, and it's probably, it's futile for me to talk about Dharmakaya, which is kind of what we'll talk about in a bit. So as I said, that's the 3 bodies of Buddha, and that's kind of a crash course in the 3 bodies of Buddha. But I think innately that should make sense to you in the sense of what we know about even Zen, of the relative sense of self and other. But there's this ultimate sense of things, and that is Dharmakaya. Now, the interesting thing when I was thinking about this is that I understand the idea of homage to the manifest Nirmanakaya Shakyamuni Buddha. Nirmanakaya Shakyamuni Buddha. But then to say homage to the Dharmakaya Vairocana Buddha is to say all of reality, but then to personify it in a figure, which is kind of odd. And again, I think we can see pictures of Vairocana Buddha, and Vairocana is described as having properties, but then Vairocana Buddha is also said to be the body of the universe itself. So there's a strange kind of tension there, which I'm going to attempt at some stage to try and give my take on that. A lot of what's said about Vairocana Buddha, for instance, as I said, comes from the Flower Garland Buddha, and the Flower Garland Buddha is really fascinating. It's a big collection of sutras. The Flower Garland Sutra, is a big collection of other sutras together, and a big part of it is this story of a pilgrim going on a journey and meeting various bodhisattvas and picking up teachings. 53 of them. All very sattvic. Very interestingly, when I was reading about it, one of the bodhisattvas this pilgrim meets is a prostitute, and she is said to be a highly realized bodhisattva, and she can, through her kisses and hugs, she can enlighten people. Very interesting. Not our school. Don't look for that in here. But I really like that, especially when you think about religions and the conservative aspect of religions, and the demonization of things like sex workers. And this highly revered sutra has a highly revered bodhisattva who is openly working as a prostitute, which I just thought was just really, really interesting. And this pilgrim is meeting all these different various bodhisattvas, and eventually meets Samantrabhadra and I think Maitreya Buddha. And at the end, they're brought to this tower, and they go up this tower, and they get given a vision of the universe. And this is where the Flower Garland Sutra goes full psychedelic, because the description of the universe is it's described as being like fractal. So every atom in the universe, they say every dust, but I think we were saying this, that when they say a speck of dust, what they meant is an atom, but every atom in the universe is itself a universe. And our universe is an atom in another universe. And its universe is all the way down. I don't know if you've ever seen those fractal images, where if you keep zooming in, it's the same image, just get the Mandelbrot set. You keep zooming in, and the circles just keep. You can never reach the bottom of it. So I've heard it described as a psychedelic fractal vision of the universe, and in this vision, it's revealed to this pilgrim this mad psychedelic version of reality, and other things. Every point in the universe contains every other point in the universe. These images of interdependence we get, where, Indra's web, where it's jewels and every jewel reflects every other jewel. So, really, kind of a very evocative, magical, psychedelic description of an interdependent universe. But every atom in your body is itself a universe. And in every single universe, Shakyamuni Buddha appears. Now we get into, I was reading about then this triggered a massive philosophical war in Mahayana Buddhism, which is, is there one Shakyamuni or is there infinite Shakyamunis, and they think like that. But the story goes is that in every single universe, Shakyamuni Buddha appears to teach. So it's kind of the flower garland view of reality, psychedelic, fractal. But it is then said that all of that is the body of Vairocana Buddha. So all of this is the body of Vairocana, this character Vairocana Buddha. Now, what it made me think of, now Ram, I might have to pull you in here for some Hindu fact checking here, but when I was trying to read into that, I couldn't work out if in Hinduism Vishnu or Brahma is the ultimate.
Depends who you ask.
I knew it. I knew you'd say that.
They're, you could say both.
Okay, both.
Yeah.
But this idea that there's an ultimate God thing. So Vairocana Buddha is considered the ultimate body, the ultimate Buddha, and everything else is a manifestation of their body. Which is kind of one way of ending there and saying that's what that reference means. But I thought what I would maybe also talk about is, why would Dogen, for instance, include it in the chants? And does it have anything related to what we did this morning between 10 and 1 o'clock? One interesting thing about Vairocana Buddha is you will find statues of Vairocana Buddha across Japan, but not so much in Zen temples. Now in Japan, they are known as Dainichi Nyorai, which is a translation of the Sanskrit. Dainichi Nyorai, which means great sun Buddha. And for instance, if you've ever been to Nara in Japan, there's a giant Buddha hall. I've been there. There's a giant Buddha hall, and inside is a massive statue of Buddha. Now, I was there 15 years ago, and I just thought, that's Buddha. Turns out that is Dainichi Nyorai. That is Vairocana Buddha. It's got a very particular mudra, but that is a statue. It's, in Japan they have these daibutsus, these massive statues of Buddha, and most of them aren't Shakyamuni Buddha. The great Buddha at Kamakura is a very famous one. That's Amida Buddha, for instance, because of the hands, I think. So the massive Buddha in Nara is Dainichi Nyorai, and the sect of Buddhism. So, for instance, Pure Land Buddhism, which is the biggest sect of Buddhism in Japan. I mean, I got news for you. Zen is not the most popular school. Pure Land Buddhism is, and they're very much into Amida Buddha, and they evoke Amida Buddha's name. Shingon Buddhism is the school that really reveres Dainichi Nyorai, Vairocana Buddha. And as a kind of a segue over to what we do, I'd like to talk a little bit about Shingon Buddhism. Because one thing is, it was highly influential on Kōzan, for instance. So the more mystical, esoteric things, you've probably seen Myozan do a Keto ceremony. And at one stage in the Keto, it gets very esoteric, and there's hand signals, and there's weird movements, and there's screaming of... Some of you in here remember being asked to scream die. So that a lot of that is the influence of Shingon Buddhism on Zen. Now, Shingon Buddhism, literally Shingon means true words Buddhism, which is kind of, if you further translate it as mantra Buddhism, which kind of tells you something. So if Zen Buddhism, Zen, Chan, Jhana, meditation, Shingon Buddhism, true words Buddhism, is sometimes known as the mantra school, which kind of tells you something about where their practice goes. Now, Shingon Buddhism actually has three main aspects to it: mandala, mantra, and mudra. So mantra is chanting, and they're very similar to the idea of Om. They have their version of Om, a seed syllable, which again, is the whole universe contained in a sound. Mudra, they do kind of esoteric things with their hands. Again, some of that is in Zen, in the Keto ceremony. But a very interesting thing about Shingon Buddhism is mandala, the aspect of a mandala. So you probably all know what a mandala is, but a mandala is often considered this image you get in Buddhism, across schools of Buddhism, which is this elaborate kind of diagram, often of the universe. Usually has circles and squares and lots of Buddhas coming out from a central point. It's very much associated with Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism. And that's a big part of Shingon Buddhism. And now, Shingon Buddhism, by the way, kind of very similar story to Dogen. Kukai, the founder of Shingon Buddhism, was in the 9th century in Japan, and it's very similar to Dogen. Wasn't satisfied really with what he was hearing, so went to China and encountered Vajrayana esoteric Buddhism and brought it back to Japan. So Shingon Buddhism is very esoteric. So there's a lot of hidden secret teachings, a lot of mantras, mudras, and they focus a lot on mandalas and visualizing mandalas. And what they visualize is these grand psychedelic maps of the universe, with Buddhas within Buddhas and universes within universes. And at the center of it all is Dainichi Nyorai. So they visualize Dainichi Nyorai, Vairocana, and his body being the body of the universe, quite a bit. And again, we won't talk too much about Shingon Buddhism, but just suffice to say that it was influential on Zen. I mean, Kōzan, for instance, was highly influenced by it, and it's what influences the slight sliver of esotericness we have in Zen Buddhism. So that's a Japanese school, for instance, which really is focused on Vairocana Buddha, and they'll chant mantras related to them, and they'll try to imagine them. So I thought the last thing I would kind of talk about here is how can we relate this to what we do? And I thought the reason this teisho came about was I was thinking about that line and whether or not to talk about it. And at the same time, I read this passage from Shobo Genzo. So I thought I would I'd read it and then kind of use it as a jumping off point for maybe somehow thinking about how we could think about this vast cosmic psychedelic Buddha in relation to our very dour Protestant, wear black, face the wall practice. So in this fascicle, Buddhas alone with Buddhas, the central thesis of it that Dogen keeps repeating is, I'm going to paraphrase this now, but he keeps saying things like, your true body is the universe in various different ways. And then at one stage says, an eternal Buddha said. By the way, whenever Dogen says an eternal Buddha said, he's usually talking about an actual guy in China, who you can look up who it was. So this was Master Chosa Keishin. So it's very funny when Dogen says an eternal Buddha. I used to always think it was just a mythical thing, but then people say, no, he's actually quoting a dude, and they know where the quote came from, which is kind of interesting. So an eternal Buddha said, the whole earth is the real human body. The whole earth is the gate of liberation. The whole earth is the one eye of Vairocana. The whole earth is our own Dharma body. Now, what's interesting about that is, before we get to the line about Vairocana, is, Dogen sometimes, you can think of Dogen in terms of lots of rules. Do this, don't do that, don't have swords in the Zendo, don't idle chit-chatter, don't do this, when you go into the toilet, do this, when you're washing hands, do that. Or we can also think of Dogen in terms of very bizarre language, mountains dancing, flowers of Buddha turning flowers of Buddha, very kind of sometimes hard to grasp language. And other times in the middle of it, Dogen just tells you straight up the truth. The whole earth is the real human body. The whole earth is the gate of liberation. So I think he's just basically telling you about oneness, dropping of self and other, the big self, the true self, the big picture. I think that line is pretty straightforward. The whole earth is the real human body. The whole earth is the gate of liberation. I think that very much speaks to what we do in our way of doing things. Here and now is the gate of liberation. It's right here. This is the true human body, and the gate of liberation is right here. You do not have to travel. He says something to dusty foreign lands. You don't have to go here, you don't have to go there. The gate of liberation is right here. And then he throws in this curveball. The whole earth is the one eye of Vairocana. And I think that's just suffice to say that he is repeating the same thing over and over again, which is the whole earth. I think he's trying to describe the same thing in different ways, at different levels of magnification in a way. The whole earth. I mean, you can look at this two ways. Your body is the whole earth, but that works in reverse. The whole earth is your body. And then he says the true body is the one eye of Vairocana. So I think you can see this on a cosmic scale, and you can see this on a very, very real, down-to-earth scale. Anyway, he talks about why is he saying one eye, and so I'm going to skip all of this because it gets very Dogen-esque about, do not think when we say I that we mean I. Typically when he says something like that, like, this is one thing, but do not think I'm saying that. But before I move on and finish up, there's a beautiful, beautiful passage at the end of this. The whole earth is our own Dharma body. To seek to know oneself is the inevitable will of the living. But those with eyes that see themselves are few. Buddhas alone know this state. Others, non-Buddhists and the like, sorry to non-Buddhists, but others, non-Buddhists and the like, vainly consider only what does not exist to be their true self. Vainly consider what does not exist to be their true self. To be their self. What Buddhas call themselves is just the whole earth. What Buddhas call themselves is just the whole earth. In some, in all instances, whether we know or do not know ourselves, there is no whole earth that is other than ourself. So, I think Dogen's been pretty clear there. The rounds of when I said that, I think is the vote on that. I've loads of notes here, but I'm going to. I don't think much more needs to be said. I think Dogen's words are saying it very clearly. But I think I would like to say one thing on different types of practice. And neither is right, neither is wrong, neither is better. But what struck me was the Shingon Buddhist and the Zen Buddhist are doing exactly the same thing. The Shingon Buddhist who is imagining a vast mandala of Vairocana's Buddha's body with thousands of Buddhas and lotus leaves coming out of it is trying to see something. Or not trying to see, but is seeing something. And I think that when we sit and face the wall, we are seeing the exact same thing. It is just a different angle on the same thing. If we consider that Vairocana Buddha is everything, that would include vast shimmering golden towers of life. But it must also include the cracked paint on the wall 2 feet in front of you. It also must include the puddle of vomit I stepped over on my way here. It includes the pain in your legs. It includes the sound of birds. It also includes the sound of kegs of beer being dragged across a beer garden. It includes the bells of Christchurch. It includes the police sirens. It includes 84,000 lotus leaves, each with a universe on its tip, and each universe having Shakyamuni Buddha inside. It's all included in the same thing, and I just think that what we're doing is looking at it at different levels of magnification. That's all it is. Some people are looking at it in a vast scale. We are looking at it at our scale. I went to cinema last night to see a film called Project Hail Mary, the sci-fi film. And they're trying to solve this sci-fi problem in it. And there's a meeting between astrophysicists and molecular biologists. And the astrophysicists are looking at the problem through a vast telescope. And the molecular biologist is looking at the problem through a microscope. And they're looking at the same problem. And that's kind of a theme of the film. And it occurred to me that our practice is the same. We are looking at the exact same thing, just in a different way. We will defer to Dogen one more time and another mention of Vairocana, which I really think says it all from Dogen's point of view. So this is Ihai Koroku, Dogen's extensive record, sometimes jokingly called Dogen's expensive record. But it's just more sayings of Dogen. I mean, I know we revere Shobogenzo, but he said a lot more than Shobogenzo. And this is only scratching the surface. But this is a collection of everything. Like, this is just, for instance, this one here is informal meeting for the end of the summer practice period. So they noted everything. I'll read the whole thing, but there's a bit then which, again, and the great thing about the index at the back is I looked up Vairocana, and it said, go to page 487. Informal meetings are primarily for exalting the family instructions. However, they are not caught up in the forms and rituals of the 3,000 decorous manners, and do not discuss the vain struggles about the 80,000 minutiae of formal practice. These instructions are simply the sitting cushions and Zen boards of the 7 Buddhas, and the source of life root of the ancestors. Therefore, this is not the realm of the 4 jhanas or 8 samadhis. How could it be measured in terms of the 3 wise or 10 sacred stages? So I think what he's saying there is there's lots of discussion about the 10 stages of jhanas, the 4 things of this, the 9 things of this. And he's saying, how could this be measured in terms of 3 wise or 10 sacred stages? Every day just sit, dropping off body and mind. Do not be worried with a scene of laughable confusion about comparisons between barbarians or the civilized. Do not vainly waste a moment, but always cherish time. If you ask about the universal and particular within this, the great venerable precious one is apparent and magnificent. At just this very time, how is it? Great assembly, do you want to clearly enact this? So he's giving out to me in a way, talking about the universal and the particular, He's kind of saying, why have you spent the last 40 minutes talking about this stuff? After a pause, Dogen said, within the entire bright, clear world, nothing is hidden. Sitting, cutting off Vairocana, cannot be matched. Geese drinking milk in water can swallow the pure flavour. Bees gathering nectar from flowers do not mar remaining fragrance. I'm going to repeat that. Within the entire bright, clear world, nothing is hidden. Sitting, cutting off Vairocana cannot be matched. So I think for us here, we invoke the name of Vairocana. We pay homage to Vairocana. But then we sit and we cut off Vairocana. You know, I'm always quoting Wang Po, you cannot use a Buddha to find a Buddha. He kept saying that to his students, you cannot use a Buddha to find a Buddha. Now this is not, I'm not degrading those who visualize Buddhas, but in our way, at the end, we pay homage to Vairocana, but we cut off Vairocana. As I've said before in a teisho, Wang Po says at one stage, it is right before your eyes. You know, the golden, shining, cosmic, fractal body of Vairocana is right before your eyes. It is the radiator, it is the paint, it is, for me, that cushion. It is this right here. And you can call it Vairocana Buddha, or you can not call it Vairocana Buddha. But it is sitting right in front of you. And regardless of what comes and goes, Dogen reminds us at the end, stop thinking about it, stop talking about it, and just sit. May the merits of these teachings penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together may realize the Buddha's way. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Bodhisattvas